is the Japanese guy. Welcome to today's episode of Vestibular Talks. Today's episode has a special guest, David. David is the Ambassador Board Chairperson and Support Group Facilitator for the Vestibular Disorders Association. I know that's a lot to say, but yes, David is associated with the Vestibular Disorders Association, and he helps uh, by introducing or facilitating communication between the ambassadors and Vita themselves. Uh, David has experienced vestibular disorders of his own, and he's here to share his story and his success with us and all of you. All right, take care, guys. Find your happiness. All right, Dave, we're live. How are you
Um,
today?
I'm doing great. How are you?
Great, great. Thank you for being part of this episode of Vestibular Talks. Really appreciate it.
And thank you for having me. I appreciate what you've been doing for vestibular patients for the last several months. Thank you.
It's a pleasure. It's a pleasure. Thank you. Dave, you mind telling us a little bit about you, your story?
I sure would. I'd love to. My name is David. I am right now the current ambassador board chairperson for VITA. And my story kind of begins a little different than most vestibular patients. I had a stroke about 7 years ago, which affected my cerebellum, which is in the balance part of the brain, which I didn't know until that time. So basically, what happened to me is I lost my balance suddenly, and I didn't really know what was going on. The doctors thought I was having a vestibular issue also.
Mm-hmm.
And so I went to the emergency room, and they sent me home and said, just get some rest and your vestibular thing should clear up in a couple of days. Well, it didn't clear up in a couple of days. It got a lot worse. So I went back to the ER. At that point, they did diagnose me with a stroke in the cerebellum. So I went about 48 hours having a stroke before it was actually diagnosed.
Wow, that's scary.
Yeah. So how I got involved with the vestibular thing is as I was recovering from my stroke, the doctors and the therapists were very good at helping me restructure my muscles and getting my muscles strong again. But for me, the biggest thing was my balance and dizziness. I couldn't, were the two things that were the cause of my disability to be worse. Not
Yeah.
my legs, because my kind of stroke is a little different. It wasn't a lot about my muscles. It was a lot about my brain and my vestibular issues that I had. So in researching after I started getting a little better, I wanted to figure out why they weren't recognizing how to help me get better. And basically, I found out I'll get to the Vestibular Disorders Association and found that diagnosing people and treating people sometimes is very challenging. And where I had a stroke, that's even more challenging because I had what a lot of people call a dual diagnosis. So I have a stroke, which is in itself bad enough, and
Yeah.
on top of that, I would get I got the vestibular disorder. So I'm kind of dealing with two different things here, and most doctors can't. They're either dealing with vestibular or they deal with stroke. They don't kind of deal with both at the same time. It's very, my case is very rare.
Very
I've only
unique.
met, yeah, I've only met I think 2 or 3 people since my stroke that have similar things that I had, where they just had the dizziness where it comes on. So yeah, so that's kind of what led me to my volunteer and my advocacy for vestibular disorders, because when I was having my stroke, like I said, I became very dizzy to the point where I couldn't walk. And I figured, if people don't understand dizziness, then it must be very hard for people that are going through it on a daily basis,
Yeah.
like I was. It must be very challenging. So that's how I got involved with all this advocacy work, and I love doing it.
So Dave, you speak of it as if you're doing much, much better now. So has the dizziness and the like feeling unbalanced, has that resolved quite a bit or what?
It's actually better. From what I'm gathering from my doctors that I've seen, I will never get totally better because for me, I have brain damage. So the chances of me getting better, the only way that it could get better is if they could operate. But the operation risks are very, very,
Oh, I can
yeah,
imagine.
to do the operation is very risky, and where I have a fairly good quality of life right now, I wouldn't even want, and the doctors wouldn't chance it, and I wouldn't want to chance it. So, I still have dizziness and lightheadedness on a daily basis. But the big thing about it, and this is what I try to tell other people, is you have this, but how do you cope with it? Okay, so
Hmm.
I know I'm going to have this probably for the rest of my life. Like I said, not when I first had my stroke, it was so bad I couldn't even walk.
Yeah.
Now, obviously, I can walk and I can do things independently. But I just, like most vestibular patients, I kind of have to pick and choose which things I can do and can't do, because there's some
Yeah.
things I still can't do. So,
All
but I
right.
like to tell a lot of people, that's what a vestibular patient goes through on a daily basis. They're picking and choosing which events and which activities they're going to be using or doing.
Engage. Yeah.
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 So, yeah.
Dave, I'm not too familiar with this. I mean, I've heard of strokes, and I personally haven't had any family members or any close relatives that have had them, so I'm not too familiar with them. But symptoms wise, was there any warning sign, or it just randomly, like just bam, like it just hits you at once? How's that work?
That's a great question. So, a little bit about my background. Before I had my stroke, I was I was an emergency medical technician in my town. So I've been
Okay.
doing that. I had been doing that for 25 years. So I knew the signs and symptoms of a stroke, and it's always the FAST, facial droop, arm weakness, speech
Mhm.
slurred, and then time to call 911. Almost everybody has learned that. What I didn't know, and I wasn't taught even as a professional that was responding to emergencies, is that sudden onset of dizziness can be also a sign of a stroke. So
Oh,
when I was having my stroke, even though my mind kind of was off balance a little bit, I didn't really have stroke in my mind. I had my wife thought I might be having a heart attack. I kind of ruled that out in my head. I really didn't have any chest discomfort, and I just said, let's just go to the ER because I'm not doing well. So basically, what happened, Johan, is I was sitting and we were having a birthday party for a family member. I was sitting in a chair, and my wife told me to come up and get dinner. I get up from my chair, and all of a sudden, it's like somebody hit me in the back of the head with a board or something, and all of a sudden, it just snapped just like that quickly. I started getting extremely dizzy to the point where I couldn't even stand up. I was like grabbing the walls and whatnot. And then, of course, that made me very ill because it's like being on a merry-go-round going
yeah,
round and round and
yeah,
round.
yeah,
And for those that don't do well with that type of motion, which is me, it obviously made me, physically sick and vomiting. So, I went in the bathroom, and my wife, we said, let's get in the car. Retrospect, I should have probably called 911, but I was a professional, and I didn't feel it was a true emergency at the time. So we
yeah,
got in the car, and we got to our local hospital within 30 minutes of the first event, which in stroke time, it's you look for the golden hour.
yeah.
If you have a stroke, you want to try to get to a stroke center or emergency center within an hour of the time that you have it, because at that point there are some types of drugs, the clot busters. A lot of people hear about that type of medicine, but the doctors won't give that out if you're too far into a stroke. It gets riskier and riskier as you progress in your stroke. So, anyways, I got to my local ER in about an hour, and unfortunately, and I see this happening. It happens a lot. They did not see. So the signs of the FAST, which is the facial droop and all that, none of that had come on yet. All I had was, sudden onset of dizziness. So even I didn't believe I was having anything that was life threatening.
Yeah.
So, and the doctors kind of just looked at me and said, "Oh, you probably have vertigo," and that's kind of what they diagnosed me with. And now I know that vertigo is not a diagnosis. So I
Yeah.
learned something from that. But they sent me home and said, if you rest for 48 hours, you'll get better. So I did what they suggested, but I wasn't getting better. I was getting worse. And then
Hmm.
within probably the second day that I was home, I started having the classic signs of a stroke, the facial droop. I had trouble speaking. At that point, I knew that I was having a stroke, and we called an ambulance that time and got me to the ER. And then I was correctly diagnosed at that point. So I work, some of my advocacy work is not just with vestibular patients, but it's also with stroke patients. And then I really care a lot about the medical diagnosis error part. And that's what happened with me. I had they had an error because it looked a lot like a vestibular thing, but it was actually a stroke. And I work heavily advocating for people that have diagnostic errors. And I'm working with a bunch of professors, prominently with Johns Hopkins University in Baltimore.
Mm-hmm.
And we just kind of, we're working with professionals to try to get everybody on the same boat to make sure that they rule out when somebody comes to the hospital with extreme onset of dizziness. It's very important that stroke is ruled out. Now the people that come in with dizziness in the ER, only 5% of them are probably going to be an emergency stroke victim.
Yeah.
So 95% of your dizziness issues will be probably inner ear. But for one of the 5% like me, it's dangerous. There have been people like me that have died because they have been misdiagnosed. So that's kind of what my voice gives out. This happened to me. I don't want this to happen to any other family.
Yeah,
So,
yeah, absolutely.
yeah.
Dave, so what's the best procedure or the best test in order to assess a stroke early enough? Would an MRI or a CAT scan would be what determines it, or what is it?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's a couple problems, and that's why I'm working with a team, like I said, from Johns Hopkins. But the problem is it is a CAT scan or an MRI is going to be the only. There's a couple different tests, but the real test is the MRI or the CAT scan, is because a little bit about the anatomy, where I had it in the cerebellum. It's called the back brain, so it's in the back of your head, right where your veins come into the brain in there. And so in that section, I think it's a CAT scan is the one that they like to use so they can see down further. So this is where the issue becomes, and if you have 95% of your people come into your ER that are dizzy, but are probably not having strokes, is that a good? It could be a waste of medical dollars to CAT scan or to MRI every person that comes through your MRI that is presenting with dizziness, because as far those are $4,000 to $5,000 a shot. Even I understand the economics. I don't want healthcare dollars wasted on stuff like that. So right now we're in a development stage, and like I said, I'm working with a team from Johns Hopkins. The only difference between a stroke that I had in a vertigo or an inner ear type thing is there is a sudden eye movement that you can see, but from what I've been told, most emergency room doctors, most general doctors will not recognize that by looking in your eye. It will be a trained neurologist that does that. So in retrospect, I probably should have seen a neurology in my ER visit. But there are some ERs in the country don't even have neurologists that are on site now. So in conjunction with this study we're doing with Johns Hopkins, is they've come up with it's a set of goggles basically, and these goggles can determine whether or not you are having a inner ear issue or a central issue, a brain issue by your eye movements. So it's gonna this type of piece of equipment, when it becomes available, it's still in the testing mode right now. When it becomes available, it's going to be a great tool for any doctor that you present at the ER. They can put these goggles on your eyes, and instantly it's going to come back on a smartphone or a computer and say, this person is possibly having a central issue. So at that point, you can take the people that it is thinking that's having a central issue and give them the imaging. And you're not wasting it as much, because this procedure, from what I'm told, is pretty accurate. So you're going to be, most of the people that you're going to be imaging will probably be having some type of central brain aneurysm or brain event if they have that tested positive.
That's very, and hopefully it becomes available, and hopefully more and more people are able to put it to good use and to be able to recognize the symptoms of a stroke versus a vestibular disorder early enough, because I'm sure it was very scary for you and unsettling to be sent home, and 48 hours later have to go back to the hospital because you're feeling even worse, and your life is at risk. And even not just your life, but your quality of life, because what if the stroke does more damage in the precious time that you're at home rather than being treated? So that's wow.
Yeah, so that's how I pretty much how I get into this, because uh, as I was recovering my stroke, initially I couldn't walk, I couldn't do a lot of talking. I was at like a third grade level coming out of the stroke, so I had to learn a lot of the English, the language again. I had to learn how to walk. I came out with a walker at 52 years old. I was 52 years old, and I was on a walker. It's like not something you really want to be when you're 52 years
No.
old.
Yeah.
So I worked on getting better, and that's where I got into to volunteering. I met with like I said, I met with John Hopkins first. They introduced me to Cynthia Ryan through the Vestibular Disorders Association, and I got involved with helping to advocate for people that are dizzy and balance issues also. And I found that keeping my brain busy when I had this event, uh, either any chronic illness patient, I recommend keeping your brain busy, doing something, volunteering, using your brain. It helped me recover. Although today I'm not back to 100%, I am a lot better than I was, and I'm grateful for that.
Oh, you're a warrior, Dave. Like I can see that. Like look at you. Like you had to basically learn how to talk again, how to walk, how to manage your life, and look at you. Like you're even doing more for the community because you're involved with the Vestibular Disorders Association, helping others as well. So like not many people are as brave as you. So congrats. Like, that's kudos for that. Like that's amazing. That's
Thank you. Yeah, thank you.
Dave. Now the Vestibular Disorders Association. I know you're in charge of the ambassadors area. If somebody wants to become an ambassador, correct me if I'm wrong, they don't necessarily have to have a vestibular condition, right? It could be someone perfectly healthy that just wants to be involved and wants to help out. That's correct?
Yes, that's very correct. As a matter of fact, in our ambassador program, we like to have as many different types of walks of life. We have, we have patients, we have professionals that are in this. Sometimes physical therapists. We love to have some doctors if they're available. I know that time is very valuable. We'd also, could use family members, maybe somebody that's a family member that's that's supporting somebody else with in helping, to get our word out there. Because basically, with the ambassadors, is we're trying to, engage people in either social media or our local communities, and learn a little bit more about what a vestibular disorder is. Because most people, and I'm one of them, didn't know what a vestibular disorder was until I had one. I had no idea when, I kind of learned that myself. The doctors never told me I had that type of disorder. They just said, you're dizzy, and they didn't really have any coping methods for me. So that's why I decided, to help other people to come up with coping methods, or learn other people's coping methods.
Yeah.
And I think you also know that I started a Facebook support group also. It's called the Vestibular Disorder Support Group. And there was one lady that was doing this a little after I had this, and I joined this group, and I liked it. And there was like 300 people that were in this group, and she decided she didn't want to do it anymore. So I asked her, she was going to close it, and I said, can I take it over, because I feel there's a real need for this. I'm one of them. So myself and I had 3 other people that were in there to help me administer it, and we just took it over, and to this day, right now, we have close to 12,000 people that have joined that group. On Facebook that are generally, and we have people from, last I counted, was over 100 countries in the world.
Nice.
That have joined, and it's all, and everybody from every country or every nationality, even if they don't speak the language, they understand that some type of support is good for them.
Yeah, that's impressive. And then from 300 people to almost 12,000, wow.
It just goes to show you that there is a great need for it. And the good thing about this group is, like I talk to Vita every so often, is because it's around the world and there's 12,000 people, you can go onto the site at almost any time in your time zone, and you're probably going to find somebody else that's on that site,
Yeah.
because we have so many people around the world. People go on at 3 in the morning because they're feeling lonely or they're feeling depressed. And there's usually 20, 30 people on there that they can actually talk to. And
Nice.
our group does a great job at helping others. So
That's very nice. That is
yeah.
very nice.
Yeah.
Dave, education is primordial, right? Because as you said, the doctors said, oh, you have vertigo, but you're right. Vertigo is not a diagnosis, it's a symptom. And I experienced the same here. My doctor, when I went there at the beginning that I was dizzy, he's like, oh, it's just classic vertigo. You have vertigo, don't worry. So how can we educate the medical community to understand that vertigo is not an actual diagnosis, that there must be something else going on, whether it's the vestibular system, the brain, the nervous system? How can we educate them to realize that vertigo is not a condition?
Yeah, that's a great question. And that's probably one of the hardest obstacles that we have as a vestibular community have faced, is we have some professionals behind us that are really good and really understanding. And then there are others that just, for one reason or another, don't want to learn more about the vestibular disorders. And they just, and some people just think they know a lot. And I think just the way we got to do it, Johan, is it's a tough way to do it, but it's one-on-one with as many people as we can get. And that's what the ambassadors do out there, is our voice. We try to get our voice to be heard, not just through our community, but through our professionals. And a lot of times I've gone to my doctor's appointments before, and they've had, sometimes they have a trainee with them. It's a teaching hospital that I go to. And I will ask the student, they're close to their medical degree, what do they know about vestibules, and kind of give them my story about what happened with me. And it kind of puts the light goes on. They said, well, I didn't really learn this in school. So, education, and I know the Vestibular Disorders Association, they have a different committee that is pushing and helping to get more education for our doctors that are coming on board. So in medical school, they're looking to see a better piece and a more understanding as far as vestibular disorders goes. And through our doctors that are already there, I think doing the most we can as ambassadors and just as patients, and talking to your doctors, questioning them. I know some doctors don't like to be questioned, but I mean, I have to mine, and I ask, I want to know why and what's going on, and kind of force your doctors into, sometimes it's a little bit uncomfortable for them, but it's okay. It's our body. And so we need to know. So, I always tell people, you need to advocate for yourself in your healthcare. And a lot of times that's hard for somebody like myself. At first, I had a stroke. My brain was not in a place where I could advocate for myself. I was lucky I had a spouse that did a lot of advocating for me. So I would suggest to people that have chronic illnesses or something, if they can't advocate for themselves, maybe get somebody that can, a spouse,
support.
A family member, even a counselor. Almost any medical place that you go to will allow, even now with the coronavirus around, I know that's a little more difficult piece, but most places will allow an extra person in that room, so that you can help them comprehend if they don't comprehend it. I always encourage that, to help somebody else advocate for their health care. So
that's very nice, very nice. Dave, where can people find you? You mentioned the Facebook group. You mentioned that you support Vita. How can people find you and get in touch with you?
Okay, so the Facebook group is, if you search Vestibular Disorders Facebook group, Vestibular Disorders support group on the top bar of Facebook, you can find our group there. I'm on Twitter at Dizzy Ambassador. Okay. And they can find me on Twitter there, and I'm on Facebook as my own name, David. Last name is spelled Morrill. I'm on Facebook. They can find me there also. There's a lot of different outlets that I'm doing. I'm always looking on Facebook to advocate for vestibular patients and tell our story. So, and I also encourage people that have stories out there. You can submit them to vestibular.org.
Okay.
That'll go right to the Vita site, and they a lot of times will ask to post these stories, and it helps other people. I think sometimes if they say, hey, that person in that story is me,
They relate.
I can relate to that person, so maybe that would help one person. So we're always looking for people, personal stories along with success stories. We really like to hear that in our support group. We have a lot of success stories, people that have overcome this, how they did it, and that helps too, because when people first get this, they wonder, how long is this going to be going on for me? Is this going to be a lifetime thing? And it's a different answer for everybody. So,
Yeah.
But there are a ton of success stories. So what I would also tell everybody is never give up. We're always having new technology. We're always having new breakthroughs in medical science.
Yeah.
And I am encouraged that someday we will overcome this, and we will all have diagnostic correct and cures for people
Really correct.
with vestibular disorders.
Yeah. No, thank you very much, Dave. Really appreciate your time, and you are a great example of a success story yourself, and you're a great example of what being like believing in you and being persistent and being disciplined gets you. Because look, from having a stroke that basically put your life on hold for a while to being back to fully functional, talking, walking, helping others. That's great. So thank you. Appreciate it, Dave.
Yes, and thank you, Johan, for doing these interviews and these videos. They're really helpful, I think, for the vestibular patient. And thank you. I know you're an ambassador also, so I appreciate you spreading our awareness out there. We just got through the Steps to Balance week, and we had a very successful week. Even though we're in the middle of a coronavirus, we still did very well. And everybody, we're doing our next one in September, which will be the Balance Awareness Week. So hope to see everybody out there doing that, and I hope everybody stays healthy during this virus, and we can get through it.
Yes, sir. Likewise. All right, Dave. Well, I hope we chat soon again.
Okay, Johan. Thanks again. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.